Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really highly analytical strategic case file. It's designated SFEP004 case file.
Right.
And it examines the really volatile conflict dynamics that are currently playing out between the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Yeah, it's an incredibly dense situation right now.
It really is. But our mission today for you listening is actually very specific. Like, we are not here to just recap the daily news cycle.
No, not at all.
And we aren't just looking at, the initial volleys of military action. We are moving past that initial phase to dissect the underlying mechanics of what military strategists call the escalation line.
Right, the escalation line.
Yeah, our goal is to understand the exact framework of how global powers decide, how hard to hit back, and how they navigate that absolute edge of total war.
And it is vital to establish our parameters right at the top here.
Definitely.
We are approaching this through a purely strategic, impartial lens. I mean, obviously, there are intense politics and deep historical grievances intertwined with the U.S., Israel, and Iran.
Oh, yeah, massive historical weight there.
Exactly. However, our focus today is strictly on the structural mechanics of statecraft. We are examining the cold, hard logic of how nations test each other right on the brink of conflict.
Right.
So we're looking entirely at the strategic framework of escalation itself.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to truly grasp what is happening in this specific phase of conflict, you kind of have to imagine stepping onto a battlefield where someone has completely erased all the boundary lines.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. Like, there are no trenches, there are no walls, and there are certainly no neon signs dictating where the safe zones end.
No, you're just out there.
Yeah, you have a blindfold on, you're heavily armed, and the adversary's out there in the dark. And they're also blindfolded and also armed.
It's terrifying, honestly.
It is. Every single step you take is an attempt to figure out where they are, without bumping into them so hard that they instinctively pull the trigger.
It is a totally precarious scenario just to conceptualize, because you're forced to navigate entirely by feel.
Yeah.
You're calculating the environment based on, microscopic feedback, knowing that one single misstep carries just immense strategic consequences.
So, how do you fight a war when the boundaries aren't drawn on a physical map, but exist entirely in the minds of your adversaries?
Well, the central premise here is that we are no longer dealing with the binary question of, whether a nation will react.
Right. That threshold is entirely in the rearview mirror at this point.
Exactly. The paradigm has shifted entirely to the question of how much to react.
How much, yeah.
And this is where we run headfirst into the escalation line. The critical takeaway from the first stage of this strategic framework is that this line, it's not geographical.
That's not a border.
No, you can't pinpoint it on a satellite image or draw along a river. The escalation line is entirely a perception. It is an unspoken, implicit mutual agreement between warring parties about what constitutes an acceptable level of kinetic action and what crosses the threshold to trigger a massive, full-scale response.
See, I have to push back on this concept a bit.
Sure.
Because applying unspoken agreements to nuclear-armed superpowers and, massive regional militaries, it just feels like a massive strategic vulnerability.
I can see why you'd say that.
Right. When the stakes are global economic stability and thousands of lives, relying on an implicit understanding feels incredibly reckless.
It sounds like it, yeah.
Like, if you are a state actor, why wouldn't you just clearly state your boundaries? Let's use a poker analogy for you listening. If we're playing a high-stakes game of no-limit Texas Hold'em and the chips are geopolitical sovereignty,
High stakes indeed.
why wouldn't I just show you my stack and tell you exactly how much it costs to stay in the hand? Like, why keep it a secret?
What's fascinating here is that what appears reckless or, vulnerable to an outside observer is actually a highly deliberate strategy of control.
Really? Deliberate?
Oh, absolutely. Ambiguity has immense strategic value. Because if you draw a hard public red line, if you show your exact hand, you inherently tie your own hands.
Oh, I see.
Right. If the adversary crosses that explicit line, even by a fraction of an inch, the tripwire effect kicks in.
You have to act.
You are politically and strategically forced to escalate to save face and maintain deterrence, even if a full-scale war is not actually in your best interest at that exact moment.
Right, because if you don't act, you look weak.
Exactly. So by keeping the line unspoken, nations maintain operational flexibility.
So they're essentially buying themselves wiggle room.
Exactly. But it goes deeper than just us maneuvering space. In this specific phase of conflict, the dominant factor isn't necessarily who is militarily stronger in a brute force sense.
Okay.
It is about who controls the escalation better. Control is the true currency here.
Control. Yeah.
And control does not mean restraint in the sense of just doing nothing. It means acting strictly and precisely within these shifting invisible limits.
Pushing the edge.
Pushing the edge, yeah. If a nation can push the boundary right to the absolute limit without tripping the wire of an all-out war, they win the strategic advantage.
Wow.
They apply maximum pressure while forcing the adversary to either absorb the blow or take the blame for rashly breaking the unwritten rules.
So what does this all mean for the actual mechanics of warfare? Like, if the line is invisible and strategic ambiguity is the goal, how do intelligence agencies and military commanders actually figure out where the line is?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do they probe the dark without accidentally triggering a regional collapse?
Well, they execute what the strategic framework defines as controlled actions and micro-escalations.
Micro-escalation.
Right. Because the line is perceptual, they are basically forced to locate it through kinetic testing. They approach the boundary using a calculated if-then logic.
If-then, like coding.
Very much like coding. Every proxy skirmish, every covert cyber operation, and every targeted airstrike is fundamentally a test of the adversary's threshold.
Let's dig into the anatomy of these micro-escalations. Because that if-then logic, I mean, it sounds simple on paper, but incredibly complex in practice.
Oh, it's incredibly complex.
For you listening, think about trying to have a nuanced, highly complex argument with someone, but your only way of communicating is by throwing rocks at each other.
That's exactly what it's like.
The message only works if the other side understands exactly why you threw that specific rock.
Yeah.
So what actually makes one strike a test and another strike an act of war?
It comes down to the variables of the strike. The intelligence agencies and war cabinets, they're analyzing dozens of factors simultaneously.
Like what?
Well, let's look at the anatomy of a hypothetical targeted strike. The decision matrix involves selecting the exact yield of the munition, the time of day, and the specific nature of the target.
Okay.
For instance, if Nation A strikes an empty runway at an adversary's airbase at 2:00 a.m. using a precision drone, the if-then data tells them something very specific.
Because it's empty.
Right. The target is military, but the timing ensures 0 casualties.
So they're essentially saying, we have the capability to bypass your air defenses and hit your infrastructure, but we are actively choosing not to kill your personnel.
Precisely. And then Nation A waits for the
reaction.
Yes. If Nation B's reaction is muted, maybe they issue a harsh diplomatic statement, but take no kinetic action. The data tells Nation A, okay, the line is further away than we thought, we have room to maneuver.
Wow.
But if Nation B responds by sinking a naval vessel, the signal is undeniable. We have hit the boundary. We must adjust our posture immediately.
The violence is the language.
It is.
Like, an attack in this phase is almost never just about degrading a specific physical asset. Taking out a radar installation isn't just about blinding the enemy, it's a strategic telegraph.
That duality is the absolute core of this phase. The strike is a highly calibrated message designed to signal, resolve, and establish boundaries.
Right.
When forces align with the US, Israel, or Iran to launch these operations, they are meticulously calculating how the adversary's intelligence analysts will decode the telemetry of the strike.
They want them to see it.
They want the other side's radar operators to see the incoming vector and understand the restraint being exercised even in the midst of an actual attack.
Here's where it gets really interesting and strategically precarious.
Yeah.
Because this entire communication system relies on the adversary perfectly decoding that telemetry. It relies on the perception gap remaining as narrow as possible.
Which is a huge gamble.
Right. You calculate your micro-escalation, you crunch the variables, you select the 2:00 a.m. empty runway, and you think, this is perfectly restrained limit. I'm just sending a firm warning.
Exactly.
But the adversary's early warning systems pick up the launch, they don't know the intended target is empty, and they perceive an incoming decapitation strike against their leadership.
And suddenly everything changes.
What one side calculates as a nudge, the other side perceives as crossing the ultimate red line.
And this raises an important question about the true mechanics of accidental escalation. We often rely on the assumption that...
Right, like an evil mastermind pressing a button.
Exactly, a strategic desire to initiate a global conflict. But the reality outlined in this framework is much more chaotic. Massive escalation stems almost entirely from misinterpretation.
Just a total misunderstanding.
Yes, it is driven by the asymmetry of perception.
Let me bring in a different analogy here to frame this for the listener. Think about algorithmic, high-frequency trading in the financial market.
Oh, that's a good word.
You have these massive autonomous supercomputers executing thousands of micro trades a second based on tiny fluctuations in the market.
Right.
Sometimes algorithm A makes a slight adjustment to hedge a bet. Algorithm B misinterprets that adjustment as a massive market sell-off and instantly dumps its stocks.
It triggers a panic.
Exactly. Algorithm C sees B dumping and does the same. Within seconds, you have a flash crash that wipes out billions of dollars, all because one microsignal was misinterpreted by a highly stressed system.
That is a highly effective way to conceptualize the security dilemma at play here. Just replace trading algorithms with overlapping intelligence agencies, regional proxy forces, and defensive automated systems.
Wow.
One side takes a defensive posture, perhaps moving anti-aircraft batteries closer to a border purely as a precaution.
Just to be safe.
Right. But the adversary's intelligence misinterprets that defensive movement as the final preparation for an offensive barrage and decides they must launch a preemptive strike to survive.
Wait, let me make sure I fully understand the gravity of this.
Go ahead.
We are relying on highly emotional, historically aggrieved nations operating in the fog of war, often relying on incomplete intelligence to perfectly interpret the mathematical intent behind a missile strike or a troop movement.
That is the reality, yes.
That seems like a statistical impossibility. I mean, the static on that communication line has to be deafening, especially in a region as complex as the Middle East.
It is the defining vulnerability of the escalation line framework. And it is exactly why statecraft at this level is so incredibly dangerous.
I can imagine.
You are assuming the adversary will interpret your actions with the exact same rational, calculated mindset that you used to plan them.
Right, and they won't always do that.
No. Rationality is notoriously fragile under fire, and when you factor in the dense web of proxy forces in the region, groups that may have their own distinct objectives separate from their primary state sponsors, the signal degradation becomes severe.
Oh, of course. Proxies add a whole other layer.
A proxy might launch an unauthorized drone strike that the opposing superpower interprets as a direct order from the state's sponsor. The misinterpretation instantly bridges the gap between a localized skirmish and a regional war.
The message gets completely lost in translation, and the flash crash begins.
Exactly.
Which brings the most critical question of this deep dive. If this entire system is based on shifting perceptions and the communication method is this prone to static and misinterpretation, how does anyone actually know when the line has been officially crossed? Does intelligence suddenly intercept a memo? Like, is there a definitive moment of realization before the situation spirals?
The strategic reality presented here is chilling. There is rarely a real-time aha moment.
Really?
No, the intelligence community does not get an immediate notification that the boundary has been breached. In almost every historical and theoretical instance of this dynamic, leadership only realizes the line has been crossed after the fact.
Wow.
You only understand that you stepped over the invisible boundary when the adversary's disproportionate, massive retaliation is already underway.
You find out you miscalculated when the sky lights up.
Yes. And by the time the retaliation occurs, the entire landscape of the conflict has fundamentally and permanently altered.
It's too late.
It's too late. The strategic framework emphasizes that at this critical juncture, a seemingly minor variable, one targeted assassination too many, or striking a facility that was just slightly too sensitive to the adversary's domestic pride, it triggers an irreversible chain reaction.
Right.
And suddenly, the strategic options for both sides violently narrow.
It's like a trap. The trap snaps shut.
Yes, a very deadly trap.
Because once that massive retaliation happens, the nuance of the if-then logic is completely burned away.
It's gone.
You are no longer dealing with highly calibrated micro-escalations. Domestic politics instantly kick in. The public sees the kinetic impact, they see the casualties, and the political pressure to respond with overwhelming force becomes insurmountable.
Furthermore, alliance structures and mutual defense pacts are often automatically triggered once a certain threshold of violence is reached.
Oh, so it just balloons out of their control.
Exactly. At that point, the primary actors actually lose a significant degree of their own agency.
That's terrifying.
The ability to utilize diplomatic back channels to de-escalate or to turn back the clock to the original status quo is virtually eradicated.
So you can't just pick up the red phone and say, hey, we miscalculated the telemetry of that last strike. Let's reset to yesterday's boundaries.
No, absolutely not. The previous rules of engagement are voided.
They're gone.
The conflict permanently expands into a new, far more destructive paradigm. The phase of controlled testing is over, and the phase of sheer attrition begins.
Okay, so bringing all of this together, we've dissected the invisible boundaries, the high-stakes testing, the profound danger of the perception gap, and the trap of misinterpretation.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have. So what is the ultimate takeaway for you, the listener, trying to make sense of this geopolitical chess match?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, understanding the mechanics of the escalation line is the only way to accurately analyze modern statecraft.
Right.
It is the single deciding factor between a contained, localized conflict that remains a manageable foreign policy issue and a completely expanded regional or global crisis that fundamentally alters the international order.
The completely different scale.
Exactly. The most critical insight here is that the greatest danger in modern warfare isn't a state actor purposely crossing the line with full awareness of the consequences. The true danger is crossing it blindly, operating on flawed assumptions, and only realizing the error after the trap has already snapped shut.
It brings us right back to that blindfolded battlefield we talked about at the start.
Yes, it really does.
The greatest threat isn't just the weapons, it's the total lack of visibility. And speaking of visibility, looking at the final analysis in this source material, there's a looming variable that completely shifts the paradigm we've just discussed.
Oh, the non-kinetic domains.
Yeah. We have spent this entire deep dive analyzing kinetic military strikes, missiles, drones, troop movements. We've been looking at the physics of warfare.
Right.
But if military escalation is this volatile, this unpredictable, and this prone to catastrophic misinterpretation, what happens when this conflict inevitably spills out of the traditional military sphere?
Well, we are actually seeing the early stages of that shift into non-kinetic domains right now.
Exactly. So I want to leave you listening with a thought to mull over today, building on everything we've unpacked about these invisible boundaries.
It's an important thought.
If the military escalation line gets pushed to its absolute brink, and state actors become entirely paralyzed by the fear of triggering a conventional or nuclear fallout, the battlefield doesn't just disappear.
No, it relocates.
Will these nations abandon the missiles and begin utilizing massive economic levers and technological infrastructure as their primary weapons?
Moving from kinetic payloads to systemic disruption.
Right. Think about the mechanics of that. If a nation's entire power grid suddenly goes dark in the middle of winter, or if a state-sponsored cyber attack intentionally crashes a central banking system, where exactly is the escalation line then?
It's a blur.
It is.
Yeah.
If an invisible line of code wipes out the logistics network of a major port, crippling an economy without firing a single shot, is that a microescalation?
That's the debate.
Or is that an act of war that justifies a kinetic missile strike in return?
It's an incredibly gray area.
As the weapons change from explosives to algorithms, we might find ourselves right back on that battlefield, completely blindfolded all over again, trying to figure out who just crossed the line.
It is a profound strategic question that will frankly define the next decade of geopolitical conflict. Thank you for joining us as we navigated these frameworks today.
Keep your eyes open, watch where you step, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.